Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I decided to go ahead and do a deficit deadlift day. It's like I've been telling you guys for a little while what I'm going to start doing. Obviously, I'm going to have 2 days dedicated to pressing overall, and because again I am doing some standing pressing work on those bench press days, in a way that creates a full body component, particularly when I throw in core and when I do chin-ups and stuff on those same days at home. What I'm kind of doing right now, I want to go back to doing enough training volume on these individual big exercises to stimulate a little bit of muscle growth while I'm doing this cutting, because you know what? I think at the rate I'm cutting now, because I'm not really losing more than about a pound a week on average for the last couple months of this cut, there's no reason I can't recomposition and make some very, very, very slow gains while doing this. And I think for me personally, that makes me feel a lot better about cutting, because I feel like what I'm doing with my cutting, I can sustain this in the long term, meaning 6 months from now, I can still be following the same diet and cardio and everything I'm doing now, because I don't feel deprived in any way, because I do get a fair amount of food. I don't really get any junk food or anything, because I'm eating pretty much bro foods for the most part. But the thing is, I am leaning out, and the scale has had a downward general trend. I don't really feel like I'm cutting, because I don't feel deprived. I don't feel like I'm dieting. So I'm like, you know what? I might as well make the most of this. Let's start doing enough volume and start doing a little more accumulation style work on these exercises and variations that are good for building muscle. Again, deficit deadlifts, they're more difficult. Because there's less axial loading, they're a little easier to recover from, so you can handle a little more training volume. So I'm going to come in and do a bunch of sets of these once a week. And you know what? That's pretty much a full body workout. It really is. And particularly if I come home and do chin-ups afterwards. Just pretty much every muscle in the body is getting some stimulation. Not ideal stimulation, but that's a hell of a workout. In fact, I feel pretty fatigued after doing all these. Like today, I only did 6 work sets. We're not counting that 405 as a work set. If we did, it would be 7, but I don't want to count it. So I'm going to count it as 6 work sets. My triples of 455 off the deficit. Now, a lot of people are asking, what is it that's making this a deficit deadlift? Well, because I have on work boots with a 1-inch heel, and I'm on top of plates. You guys know when I competed in the past in powerlifting, I wore Vibrams. So really what we're probably getting 2.5 inches of deficit here. And that makes a big, big difference. Makes a big difference. And I will say, having to do these repeatedly is forcing me to tighten up, because I think it was this set. Yeah, I think this set, or the one before it, I struggled with it. I didn't get my foot placement right. And that's kind of the other thing too, is this teaching me to get my ideal leverages again. Because on the deficit, and especially if you're going to do a lot of sets, you notice what I always say about triples and things, and doing high volumes of triples? It forces you to set up more often. It forces you to do more first reps. I'm having to mess around with my setup and find my exact foot spacing that gives me the most pop off the floor, because on a deficit, it's way, way harder to pop the weight off the floor. It really is. That's why most people lift a little less. It's getting that weight moving out of the bottom. As you guys can see, I don't have the sort of speed on these I do with a conventional deadlift. You guys see me pop 500 pounds off the floor a little faster than this first rep on these deficits. And I'm really slow on the first rep on each deficit. My second and third are faster. They actually feel easier than the first rep. So that tells me I really need to get more of these first reps in. It will carry over better to a max deadlift. And a lot of that is getting that ideal setup and ideal leverages in place. Perfect foot position to get that best pop out of the bottom, because it's so much harder to do it on the deficit. And it's one of the things I really enjoy about this. And I feel like for me, this is going to give me, going back to doing these for a while, particularly with a fair number of sets, it's going to, number one, keep stimulating muscle growth, right? Because you're moving it through a longer range of motion. And people need to remember that range of motion is just as good as reps, in the sense that a lot of people will do high reps with a partial exercise, but when you think about it in those terms, they're moving the weight a shorter distance. And they're oftentimes doing so at the less than ideal leverages. If you think about reps, we really need to think about reps in terms of how far you're really moving the weight. If you want to think about work actually done, doing 8 reps with a 20% longer range of motion is actually more work than doing 10 reps. So just kind of throwing that out there. So going back to doing a lot of these full range of motion, extended range of motion exercises, I think is going to be good for my general strength and hypertrophy, particularly when I'm doing high set training. It's going to train me to have better strength at all my different joint angles. It's going to eliminate a lot of those weak links. For now, I'm focusing heavy on the bench press, but I'm going to rebalance that later. Once my bench is caught back up, I'll go back to doing just as much overhead pressing as benching, which is probably going to be about 10 sets a week. And I very well might do this because I pick so many exercises these days that are almost full body exercises by themselves. It's like I can almost split these up into individual days to get enough hypertrophy, because that's the problem we run into with being advanced lifters. When you get more advanced, what is the problem we run into? Muscle protein synthesis uptime versus minimum volume to stimulate growth. It's kind of a catch-22, isn't it? Balancing that with your recovery really becomes tricky. I almost need to make a separate video on that, of why sometimes you might split exercises up while still keeping most of your workouts essentially full body, just to get enough workload in on that one exercise to really make a difference to stimulate new adaptations, because that's the problem we run into. We plateau easily as we get older, more advanced, particularly when you hit about past that 5-year of training mark. It becomes very, very difficult to push forward and continue to make progress. Everybody makes gains their first year. Anybody. You could be on a ridiculously stupid program that first year and make gains. We all know it. That's reality. It's continuing to make those gains as we get more advanced requires sometimes rethinking things a little bit, But yeah, today I ended up doing, on my deficit deadlifts, I did only 6 work sets. And you know what? Considering I have been doing a lot of low volume deadlifting again, I can honestly feel the difference. It feels completely different. At the end of those workouts, my hands are throbbing, my forearms are throbbing, my hamstrings, my thoracic erectors, like they really feel it. Even with only 455, it's by the time I pass about that 3rd set, when I get to about that 4th set, it really starts accumulating that fatigue, and I can feel the difference. And honestly, I pretty much need a day off from lifting the next day after doing these. And I know we could laugh about it and say, dude, it's only 455. I mean, you're stronger than that. It's just that deficit in doing those high sets. It really creates a lot of fatigue for me. But by that same token, I feel like the extra fatigue that this is creating is going to let me move forward kind of to the next level. I think the fatigue it's creating, because I've been able to recover from it and work it into my overall plan and recover, and again, being forced to do it with less axial loading, doing the deficits, I think in the long term, if I keep this up for a little while, I feel like it's really going to have some dividends. Kind of the same approach I'm taking with the closed grip bench and everything. I may very well, coming up in the near future, when I get the bench caught up a little bit, go back to where I rotate through 4 days to where I focus on an accumulation work on a main exercise and do just enough accessory stuff to make sure it's more or less a full body. Meaning, if I do a strict overhead press day, I'm going to clean it off the floor. I'm going to do some crunches with it, and I'm probably going to do some chin-ups when I get home afterwards. It's still a full body day. Only days it might not really be a true full body might be like my bench press day. But you know what? I'm kind of at a point now to where I haven't benched in a while, and the bench was my weakest lift. When I was powerlifting again back in the UK, my squat and deadlift were better than my bench. So realistically speaking, I've got long arms. My bench tends to lag behind my other lifts a little bit, at least once I hit my 30s later. I could stand to have a bench specialization day, while the other 3 days are essentially full body deadlift day, front squat day, which may turn into a back squat later when I get the front squat where I want it. I feel like the front squat's a better overall exercise for volume and athleticism, but once I rebuild front squat strength, as long as I have deadlift strength, squat will come right back too. So I could always switch that around, and Yeah, have those and then an overhead press day, and I feel like that would actually really give me the balance that I need in terms of upper body, having shoulders and everything else that matches the lower body development I tend to get from the other lifts. So I may work in that direction and do just enough accessories to make sure that everything is more or less full body or close to about 4 days a week, just enough to keep my muscle protein synthesis elevated, but still have days that are essentially specialized. And I think that's the trick to running any sort of routine that is a split, is making sure that you really aren't saying, okay, this is a shoulder day. No, it's a standing press day with some extra accessories to make sure most of the muscles in the body get worked as well. And I think that's kind of the direction I may start pushing now that I am older, more advanced, not because that's necessarily the best way to make gains, but because it will allow me to really focus on individual lifts to a larger extent and really hammer on those and get sufficient volume in to actually grow 1 day a week, and then all the other days will be there to re-stimulate muscle protein synthesis, because it'll all still be full body in a sense. So that might be the direction I go with this. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.